Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Modular. Today I'm looking at the Native Instruments Komplete Audio 6. It's the bigger brother of the Audio 1 and the Audio 2, and it has one particular special feature, and that is that the outputs on the back are DC coupled. DC coupled, yes they are. What does that mean? That means that I can take control voltages out of my computer, out of these outputs, and control my modular. So the purpose of today's video is to look at what that means, what that does, and what the heck you do with it. I'm going to be using Ableton Live, Bitwig and Reaktor a bit later on to hopefully give you a bit of a flavour as to what this means and what's possible. But first of all, DC coupling. Well, I did some very deep and heavy and interesting videos on this some time ago, DC coupling and AC coupling. And if you really want to get into the details, then do go and check those out. But the summary is that a regular audio interface has a filter on the outputs and the inputs, which filters out very, very, very low frequencies to prevent distortion, to prevent your speakers popping in and out for good audio reasons. That filter is there. However, that filter is a problem if you want to use control voltages generated by the computer into your modular, because many control voltages have no frequency at all. They are just set at a voltage. If you imagine a pitch in voltage is just a single volt number. Yeah, it's not going up and down. Modulation goes up and down, that's a frequency, that's fine, that can get through. But flat and very low, slow moving oscillations get filtered out by design. And so that messes up any possibility of using CV with your computer and your Eurorack. So you need an interface which is DC coupled. DC coupled simply means it doesn't have that filter and it lets any old rubbish through, anything at all, including flat voltages. One of the most popular audio interfaces is the Mark of the Unicorn range of audio interfaces that all seem to have DC coupled inputs and outputs. And the legend is that the only reason that they do is because in the design they forgot and left out the filter that's normally in there. And so people are using their audio interfaces to route control voltage from programs such as Modulation or VCV Rack and other bits of modular software into their Eurorack. That's fantastic. Now the problem has been up to now that there are no audio interfaces of a reasonable price that have DC coupled outputs. They're all the big ones like the Mk2, like the ones from RME or the new Presonus quantum interfaces, which have purposefully designed DC coupled outputs, which are awesome, but they're big and they're expensive and they're rack mount and they're not the sort of thing you can throw in your bag. However, the Komplete Audio 6 is completely bus powered. It has 4 outputs. It's lightweight and yet robust and will fit in your bag with your laptop and let you go out and about and control your Eurorack from your laptop. Well, a little bit of control. You've got 4, so what are you going to do with 4 outputs? Well, you could have pitch and gate and you could have 2 modulations. Something like that. Something simple. You could have a 4-channel drum machine. Sequence that for Ableton Live or in Bitwig or some other piece of software which allows for sending out of control voltage, and you can pepper that into your Eurorack. Genius. I don't think I'm going to do a full review of the Komplete Audio 6. I have done a full review of the Komplete Audio 2, and the audio engine and driver architecture is, I believe, identical between the two. So if you're interested in the inner workings of this, how well it performs with audio software in a more general way, then do go and check out that review. Otherwise, we'll crack on and get stuck in to DC coupling. One note though, people often say, why not just use a MIDI to CV interface? Yeah, do that. It's probably a whole lot easier. You can just have a MIDI to CV interface in your rack, take MIDI out of your sequencer, whatever kind of MIDI you like, and then stick that into your Eurorack. Yes, that absolutely does work. But what's interesting about using control voltage is that, well, first of all, it's just different. You can create shapes and things that run into each other and knock about and affect one another in ways that would be very, very difficult to do in MIDI. It's just a different angle, a different way of working where you're focusing on what's happening to a particular voltage as it moves around. Also, the resolution is much higher. You've only got 128 values in MIDI, whereas with control voltage, it's essentially infinite. I suppose it can be a tiny bit between all sorts of different things. And so there are creative and technological advantages to using control voltage. And it's just fun. We like to do it. And so with this, for 189 quid, you can. So let's have a look at how that works. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to be using the 4 outputs for control voltage, not using any audio from the computer whatsoever. If you wanted to combine the two, well then obviously you could use outputs 1 and 2 for the audio from your computer, and outputs 3 and 4 could be mapped to control voltage. You know, that would work, certainly. But for this, I'm just going to use all 4. So no audio, no synthesis coming from here. It's all going to be coming from the Eurorack. Right? Good. So let's start with a basic LFO. In order to plug it in, because on the back of here, these are regular 1/4" jacks, 6.5mm jacks, I will need to take my patch cable and stick an adapter on the end. It's not clever, it's just simple. And that will go into output 1 on the back, like so. And let me put that into our scope over here. Then, in Ableton Live, their new CV tools, they are still in beta, they're not quite ready yet, they didn't make it quite ready for the 10.1 update. However, it seems to be working pretty well as far as I can see, and if you want to get hold of the beta version of CV tools, you just sign up as a beta tester, or just ask nicely, basically, and they'll send them to you. And they look a bit like this. They happen over here. You've got CV instruments, CV modulation, CV utilities. We're just going to have a look at the modulation. I'm going to take an LFO, stick it down here, and see what happens. So here it is, making its lovely sine wave LFO, and we need to tell it which output to use. So we go to external output at the top, and then to our first output. And then we'll see it in our scope over here. Look at that, a perfect sine wave. So that simply proves that the control voltage being generated by this little plug-in app here is going out the side. Now if I was to pull the rate down very, very low, that's the sort of signal that would be filtered out if it was AC coupled. If it was a regular audio interface, you would not be able to get that level of slope on your LFO. Now what you'll notice, probably, is that it's not a big wave. It's not a tall wave. It doesn't go all the way up and down the scope. That's because one of the drawbacks of the Komplete Audio 6 is that it can only handle plus and minus 2 volts. Normally speaking, in Eurorack world, we're looking at plus and minus 5 volts, a 10 volt range if you like, whereas the Komplete Audio 6 can only manage a 4 volt range. Is that a problem? Yes and no. It all really depends on what you're doing. And I'll see if I can demonstrate that to you. First of all, what I'll do is I'll take a regular LFO from my Bitwig down here, and I'll stick that into channel 2. Switch this into dual channel mode. And you can see there, hopefully you can see there, that the green trace is the Bitwig, which goes plus and minus 5, and the red trace is from Ableton Live CV tools. So you can see that there is a substantial difference between the two ways, between the range, between the depth. So let's listen to what that sounds like. So what I've got is an oscillator, an STO, going through my Jove filter. So if I take the output, which here, my signal from the computer is going into my scope, so I'm taking the other side of the scope and I'm going to use it to modulate the filter. So there you go, that sounds alright, that sounds like a sweep. Now if I plug that into the Bitwig, get it going about the same speed. So you can hear that if you have the cutoff about in the middle and you're sweeping around, then actually the range, that 4-volt range, is enough to take it across all of that piece of audio. Having the wider range from the Bitwig actually does very little extra at either end. So depending on what it is you're trying to modulate, depends on how useful this is or how restrictive it is. Let me look into it a little bit more. So if I take the frequency of the Jove all the way down, so now you've got the 4 volts is opening the filter. If I took that to the Bitwig, you can hear that the CV coming out of Ableton is just opening it a little bit, whereas the Bitwig is going all the way up, and now you're starting to get the difference in that range. If I take the cutoff all the way down to the left, there's hardly enough voltage to actually open it enough for us to hear it at all, whereas with the Bitwig, plenty of room. Take that round the other side. So I hope you can see there that the 4 voltage range that you have coming out of Ableton Live is enough in most circumstances, but not enough in every circumstance. So you're going to have to adapt what you're doing to that. I mean, one of the most used modules in my rack is my little 2HP trim over here, because I'm constantly taking LFOs from the Bitwig, plugging it into that just to turn it down, just to lessen the range so that it's not quite so wangy, that it's a bit more like that. I mean, one of the advantages of the LFOs in software like this is that they do have a lot of control. I can change the depth, I can change the offset, I can change the phase, I've got multiple shapes, I can sync it up to whatever is going on within the project itself, and do all of those things really, really very easily. So let's just have a quick look at the capabilities of the LFO here. Just gone back to our single white trace over there, and let's turn our oscillator on so that we can hear it. Obviously we've got rate, but also depth, as I say. Offset. And then you've got shape. That's something called bin. I've no idea what that means. Binary, I suppose? Some kind of pulse? Who knows? One interesting thing, it has a jitter, which kind of throws noise at it, which is quite interesting. And you've also got a smoothness. Ableton Live also has another quite interesting modulation source, which is the shaper. Now you can add this as something of its own, or we can add it to the same one And now it's combining those two control voltages. This is what I mean about control voltage being very adaptable, very versatile. You can bump it into each other and it adds itself up and creates something new and exciting. And within the shaper, you can literally draw your own control voltage in. Draw an envelope, I suppose you could call it, or a modulation cycle, or a waveform. But of course it can also have its own output. So if you send it to output 2, we can plug that in. Get rid of the Batumi, plug that in here, put this to layered. And now we've got the two waves. We've got the red one, which is here, doing its thing. Let's calm that down a little bit. See, that's nicer. And then we've got this second one, which we should make do something, I imagine. So let's plug that into the other CV input. Nice. Yeah, that's quite good. That's quite interesting. I like the way it marries these two things together because, you know, I talk a lot about using hardware by itself. Well, I'm all about the hardware these days. Yeah, kind of. But I'm also all about the software. And I quite like it when these two worlds collide so well. And control voltage is interesting in hardware. I mean, it's interesting in hardware because you're often doing it kind of blind. You're kind of combining things into bits of hardware. There's not necessarily a display or whatever telling you what's going on. Whereas in software, it's all about the display. And you can look and you can visually reference and go, oh, look, that's an interesting shape. And look what I'm doing. And I'm drawing waveforms here. I can't really do that in my Eurorack. So there's definite advantages in taking some of that CV control and sticking it in your DAW. Sticking it in your software. That is very interesting. Now, the other thing, of course, you want to do is play notes because this Ableton Live is a sequencer. We want to sequence some stuff. That's going to be another huge advantage in that I could write hours-long sequences within Ableton Live, which I can't really do on my 8 or 12-step sequencer in my Eurorack. So the sequencing potential of this is huge. I mean, obviously, you can sequence with a MIDI to CV converter, and probably that's the simpler, most straightforward option because you're not really dealing with issues like resolution when you're doing notes because, you know, 12 notes in an octave is a very, very low level of resolution. And so MIDI to CV conversion can do that completely fine. However, you can also do it with CV, which I'm sure has its own advantages. But anyway, but we'll look at doing it. Let's look at how Ableton Live does that. So what we use is the CV instrument. Now, of course, you would naturally assume that this is easy. I mean, you're just sending out control voltage and that then changes notes in your Eurorack. Yes, that's easy. However, in something like Ableton Live, you're using a sequencer which is used to the world being in equal temperament, is used to the world being in tune with itself. And so if you start sequencing from Ableton, Ableton wants it to match up with the other MIDI-based stuff that it's doing itself. It just wants it all to make sense. And so to do that, it needs to calibrate itself to the oscillator. They need to talk to each other and work out what's in tune and what sort of voltage works best in order to achieve the right notes so that the piano roll in Ableton Live is doing what it says it's doing. Does that make sense? Good. So to do that, we need to take our first output as control voltage into the 1 volt per octave. The second one we're going to want to take to be a gate. So for a gate, we'll stick that into our edge cutter here, but we're not going to worry about it too much just for the moment. So our CV instrument is just this little app down here. And what you do is you set it up with the gate to go external out to output 2 and the pitch to go external out to output 1. Calibrate. Now the CV tools in Ableton Live are extraordinarily helpful. They have a little guide to tell you what it is that you need to do. So first of all, it says plug in an oscillator into the audio input. Right. So this is what it uses for its calibration. So we can take an output, the most purest output if you can, like the sine wave output, and plug that into input number 1. Hit next. Number 2, select the audio input that you plugged that into. So over here, I select external in, audio input number 1. Now I'm getting audio through this. I don't have this attached to audio output, but if you did, you would now get the sound of the oscillator coming through, and that may not be a good thing. And if you had your monitoring on, it would sound something like this. That's not really what we're after. But if you turn down this level here, we then get a nice pure signal. Hit next. Now we've got to select and plug in the pitch CV and the gate CV, which we've done. So now we need to tune our oscillator to C3. There we go. And then we click the button to start the calibration. There we go, it's having to think about it. Congratulations, you are all done. And it says your usable range is from C1 to C5. Finish. There we go. That should be it. So if we open up a MIDI track, should be able to put in a bunch of notes and have it play. And that seems right for our 4 volts. You get about 4 octaves. And that's one of those funny things that people talk about saying, oh, you know, my oscillator doesn't stay in tune for more than 8 octaves. Who uses 8 octaves at one time? Really? I mean, the fact that it can do 4 octaves is pretty good. I mean, some oscillators won't respond to the negative side of that, so it would only be 2 octaves. But still, normally speaking, if you're playing like a little 2-octave keyboard like most of the synths are, that tends to be where you're playing. You're not making huge throws up to low and high octaves all the time. Maybe you are. I don't know. But I would suggest or posit the idea that mostly we're within, 2 to 4 octaves. And this is completely and utterly capable of that. Let's get the gate bit working. Let's turn that back on. So it is triggering my envelope here. I just need to plug it in. Now if I go into Ableton and change the length of some of these bits, so why on earth am I fiddling with this knob with my hand when I could be using modulation out of outputs 3 and 4? Yes, good idea. Let's do that. So let's put an LFO out of output 3 and get that working with our sequence. Output 3, Now into our scope so we can see what's going on. So let's drag an LFO nice and simply down to there. Output, external out, output number 3. Oh. What's that about? So we've plugged in output 3 and we seem to only be getting the positive side of that LFO, of that waveform. We're getting plus 2 volts and then it cuts off at 0. It's like it's been half wave rectified. How very odd. Yes, it is odd. Now I could keep up the pretense of mystery and we could do some investigations. I can go, oh, I wonder what that's about. But I've worked it out because it's cost me hours working this out. And it's driven me completely nuts. But I have the answer, at least I think I do, as best as I can work out. What is going on here is that the outputs on the Komplete Audio 6, outputs 3 and 4, are balanced. They are balanced. They do not like unbalanced cables. Outputs 1 and 2 are fine with unbalanced, are fine with balanced. That's how you normally expect to find things. Outputs 3 and 4, unbalanced all the way. That means tip, ring, sleeve. It means 3 connections. When we look at our humble patch cable, or with the adapter on the end, it only has 2. It's got the tip and the sleeve. So the other half of the signal is in the ring bit. The ring bit that you would find on a balance cable, like this. See the difference? Now, I know this actually isn't a balance cable, it's just a stereo cable, but they look the same, they're just not wired the same. So what do we do? Well, I found the answer to this, or at least my answer. I'm sure there's a cleverer answer using properly adapted cables. You know, a balance cable to a properly merged and mixed cable at the other end, or something along those lines. But I've tried lots of different cables, lots of different places, balanced lines into XLR, back out of XLR into something else, and it all ends up the same. The best solution I've found is just to pull it out a little bit. There you go, flipping genius. So if you pull this out a little bit, then the tip is on both the ring and the sleeve or something, and that then picks up both sides of the signal and it comes out as a beautiful sine wave. Now, I don't know whether that's scientifically or engineeringly a good idea, but this is what we have. Okay, that's the answer. Do you see that? It's pulled out about 0.5 centimetre, just so that the end pulls out. Got it? It's just a regular patch cable, nothing else needed, and that then works. That is the answer. I hope you enjoyed that answer. That's the answer I'm going with until I get schooled in something better. All right? But it saves the day. Otherwise, you've got to deal with 2 volt range. You know, 1 plus and minus 1 volt maybe, because you can, using the software, you can offset it. You can change that half wave rectified one into a smaller sine wave. You can do it just with using the offset and the depth. But surely it's far better to have the full range that's available to you. And so now we have that. So let's plug that back into our filter, so that we should now have a sequence and filter going on. So you should be able to see on here, this is output 4. You see the half wave business. What I'll do is plug it in a little bit halfway. And I got my full range. Oh yeah, my full range. Now of course you can change this to be matching to the beat. and totally in sync with everything, which is nice. So there you go. I've got a sequence coming out of Ableton Live. I've got two forms of modulation squiggling around with that filter. That is CV Tools, Ableton Live, DC coupled audio interface controlling your Eurorack. Ta-da! Ta-da! There you go. Haha! There you are. Super. Bitwig Studio then is largely the same deal. You have the same sort of tools, you have a different approach to it, where Ableton Live puts sort of everything in the one device. What Bitwig likes to do is give you basic building blocks and let you wire the thing together yourself. So the CV out in Bitwig is very simple. It's just this device here. It's just a knob. It's a knob that generates CV. And then you use their suite of modulators and other bits and pieces in order to affect it. So if I open up the modulator side, I've got these three LFOs all piling into different parameters. So I've got the LFO here is attacking, I don't know, the knob, I think. This one here is attacking something else, and then this one here is attacking something else. So I'm using three LFOs to create this kind of expanding and retracting, speeding up and slowing down type modulation. And meanwhile, over here I've got another, just control voltage knob, just a simple knob. And for this one I've got a step sequence, essentially, going in and creating the modulation. And I can draw this in myself, or I can hit the random button and it will do it randomly. Now I could of course use that for notes. If I stick it into the 1 volt per octave, like so, but it's going to have no quantization. It's going to have nothing relevant to notes that I can make in Bitwig. If I want to create notes that go along with another larger arrangement within Bitwig, then I need to do the whole calibration thing on the instrument which is over here. This is Bitwig's version of the CV instrument. It calibrates and it gives you a range that you can then use for your sequencing, like we did in Ableton. Well, I wonder what would happen if I put that through a quantizer. Let's try that out, shall we? Just while we're here. That seems to work to some degree. The final thing we'll look at is a little bit of Reaktor. Reaktor is a piece of modular software, particularly if you're using the block side of things, and it allows you to patch things directly to audio outputs, which means control voltage, audio outputs, Komplete Audio 6, Eurorack. Beautiful. Native instruments in harmony with itself. So the outputs are here. You have to add a couple extras in and then check for the settings to make sure that you're talking to the right thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4 outputs. I mean, obviously this is vitally important if you are taking audio out at the same time. If you're taking sound from Reaktor out, you want to make sure that you're putting modulation to the right outputs. Otherwise, it could make a nasty noise, or it could break your speakers, or something like that. So it's important just to be aware of that. But in this instance, I'm using all 4 for modulation. So I've got 4 outputs there. Let's add an LFO. That's always a good start. So the patching in here is that I take the output from the LFO and I patch it into there. That should more or less be it. So that's output 1. Output 1 is currently doing what? It's currently sitting around not doing anything. So let's plug that into here. And that should give us our waveform. Now, interestingly, I'm not getting the full 2 volts. I'm getting like 1 volt. Why would that be? Could it be because the output level in Reaktor is actually at -6 dB? Could be. This is a factor you also have to consider because you've got the volume control up here. If I increase that, That's a little bit too far. One thinks it's going too far. So let's bring that back a little bit if I can grab it. Something a bit more like that. There you go. That looks like closer to 2 volts. So you just have to pay attention to the volume level outputs, because they affect how much voltage is going out. More the louder it is, the bigger the voltage, but only up to as far as it can handle. Do you see? Yeah, I think you see. So now I've got my friend, the LFO, going straight out of Reaktor into my Eurorack. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It is that easy, really. So I could take let's take a step sequencer, for instance, and I could take the pitch output. If I can grab it, pitch output, stick that into another output. I need a clock, stick to internal, set that going, take the gate into there. Okay, that's now going along. That's now done something. So output 2, which is the green one, that is currently gating. That's why we've got something happening. So let's take output 2 into my 1 volt per octave. So that's another interesting oddity then. I had this set up, I thought, and I'm setting gates out of output 3. But it doesn't want to work if I have it half in. It doesn't want to work at that point, so if I then push it all the way in, it then does work. Oh, Native Instruments, why did you do this? Why did you make output 3 and 4 different? Because it's just a bit of a pain in the arse. I mean, it's a workaroundable pain in the arse, but it's one nonetheless. So there you are, Reaktor, also doing it. I'm not going to do a big, huge patch because I frankly don't have the time. We need to move on and do other things. But maybe I'll get back into that later. But just to show a proof of concept that Reaktor very quickly and easily can stuff control voltage out of the Komplete Audio 6 into your Eurorack. So you could have a massive patch in Reaktor doing all the wonderful things, and you could start bringing your Eurorack into that, built purely on the patch in Reaktor. How interesting, how very interesting. I mean, this whole thing, this whole area is completely fascinating. And I think it's amazing that such a box now exists, because I've been frustrated with this a long time. I mean, the videos I did on DC coupling and AC coupling, you know, it took a long time to find something that could do it, that I happened to have something that could demonstrate it, that wasn't actually designed for it and yet sort of worked. And so that was great, so I could explain the concepts. But to have something which actually does it is brilliant. I mean, I think one of the driving forces behind this is going to be Ableton Live and its CV tools, because if that really takes off, Ableton Live drives a lot of technology, because there's a lot of users and high profile users and important people who use it. And so if it really takes off in Ableton Live, then I predict we will start seeing more audio interfaces that have DC coupled outputs, and ones which are there on purpose. Because I do get a sense that because of the fussing around with outputs 3 and 4, that the DC coupled aspect of the Komplete Audio 6 is more of a byproduct of the audio interface than something they set out to design into it. They may have done, They may well have done. If they did, then they sort of tripped up over outputs 3 and 4. But I'm just assuming that they built a decent audio interface, which is what this is. I mean, it's 189 quid. It's decent. It's made of metal in places. It's got 6 in and outs. You've got monitoring. You've got this lovely big knob on the front. You've got good quality all around, very low latency, high performance. I've done all that testing on the Komplete Audio 2. You can go and check that out. It's a great audio interface. And to have DC coupling just is, boom, puts it up another level. That's a great thing to have. And so now in my setup here, rather than fussing about one way or the other, I can just sit down and integrate the two when I choose to, if I want to. If I fancied sending something out from here into my Eurorack, I now can, which means I can sync this to this simply without having to buy a MIDI to CV interface, having to get yet another module. I can do it straight through this way. That's brilliant, that is. So, I mean, overall, despite the little hiccups, despite the only being plus and minus 2 volts, which generally speaking in my experience is plenty for what I need, then it's the most amazing thing. It's brilliant. It's totally ace. And I reckon the Native Instruments are going to sell a truckload of these just for the potential of working with these two things together. Obviously, if you need more, if you need a whole load of them in and out and this, that and the other, then get yourself a Presonus Quantum or something more designed for the job. And I hope that more interfaces will come down the line. There's always the Xbox Sleepers ES8, of course, which is the standard module that goes in here and gives you 8 ins and outs via USB to your computer. However, the problem with the ES8, or at least my problem with it, I mean, it's great, it's perfect, it's a great solution. However, it fails for me because it doesn't have inputs and headphone sockets and all the other things that I need in an audio interface, because I can't run 2 audio interfaces at once. Not on a PC, not successfully. On a Mac, possibly, yes. But on a PC, I just want one interface that does it. I don't want to have an ES8 because then I can't plug my guitar in. I can't plug my vocals in. I can't plug other bits and pieces in. So, you know, there are ways of doing it. It just depends on what it is you need. And this, by far, is the cheapest and simplest solution to connecting your computer to your Eurorack, while at the same time being a phenomenal little audio interface in its own right. So it wins. It wins all over. I just wish 3 and 4 weren't quite so fussy, if you see what I mean. So that'll do. I hope that's helpful. I do plan to get into more depth with the CV tools on Ableton Live, and also the modulation possibilities and CV possibilities of Bitwig Studio 3. With a bit of luck, I'll get dug into Reaktor at some point too, so hopefully I'll be able to pull together a few more videos of how your computer and your Eurorack can work beautifully together. So that'll do for now. Don't forget to do all the subscribing and notification things. Come and join me on Patreon, throw me a few dollars, whatever you like. Loads more videos to come, lots more goodies around the corner. So in the meantime, go and make some tunes.